Hey everyone, welcome to the channel where I share creepy and scary stories that will give you chills. If you love horror and spooky tales, make sure to subscribe and join me every week for a new story. Let's get into the dark side together. Arrival came with a storm. Thick sheets of rain battered the old road as the rusted city bus groaned to a stop. Elena Marlowe stepped down into the mud, the wind clawing at her coat like invisible fingers. Behind her, Detective Julian Rourke lit a cigarette with silver Zippo, shielding the flame with a gloved hand. They stood in silence. No signposts, no people, just trees, tall, dark, and whispering in the wind. "This it?" Elena asked, staring at the barely visible wooden trail ahead. Julian squinted through the rain. Stormtown, small place, keeps to itself. Lightning flashed in the distance. A sign appeared in the white light, nailed to a crooked tree. "Welcome to Stormtown, where the rain never stops." Charming. Elena muttered. They started down the path. Elena's boots squelched in thick mud, and her suitcase wheels locked up with every step. "This story better be worth it," she mumbled. Julian was quiet. He didn't like talking much, especially when they got close. Elena had known him from a case 3 years ago. He had a reputation for being good, but also for getting too close to the dead, sometimes literally. Halfway down the path, he stopped. "You go on ahead," he said. "There's someone I need to see." "What?" "We just got here." Julian didn't answer. He turned sharply and disappeared into the woods. Elena cursed under her breath and continued alone. Stormtown revealed itself like a half-buried secret. Wooden houses with fog windows. A windmill turning slowly against the sky. Crows circled overhead like they knew something. She reached the cafe, Nora's place. Its neon sign buzzed dimly against the storm. Inside, warmth and silence. 3 old men sat at the far table. A woman behind the counter was drying mugs with a trembling hand. A radio crackled softly, static and ghost voices. Elena stepped in and shut the door behind her. Everyone looked up. "New here?" the woman asked. Her name tag read Nora. "I'm Elena. I'm a journalist." Her voice echoed too loud in the quiet room. Nora's hand stopped moving. The men at the table looked away. One muttered something about, "Not again." "I'm here about the storm," Elena said. "The one last year. The one where—" Before she could finish, the power flickered. Lights buzzed. The old man by the window stood up suddenly. "There's no story here," he snapped. "Only wind and graves." Nora's eyes shifted. "Please, sit down. We don't talk about that night." Elena sat slowly at the counter. "Then maybe you can tell me what you do talk about." Nora hesitated. "We talk about the things we still have. Warmth, tea, silence." Elena leaned in. "And what about the girl who went missing during the storm?" Another silence, this one heavier. "She was never found," someone muttered from behind her. "And no one saw what happened?" Elena pressed. Nora answered, almost in a whisper. "Everyone saw. No one remembers." "Remember." Elena repeated the words silently as she sat in the corner booth of Nora's place, the mug of bitter coffee cooling in her hands. The wind outside still howled like it had a voice, and the storm had yet to break. Everyone saw. No one remembers. What did that even mean? The villagers had retreated into their silence, as if speaking more might crack something open, something buried beneath the mud, behind their dull stares. And yet, behind those tired eyes, Elena had seen it. Fear. Real animal fear. The cafe door creaked open. Julian stepped inside, soaked and breathless. "Elena," he said, wiping water from his brow. "We need to talk. Now." She stood quickly. "Where the hell did you go?" "I thought I saw someone. A girl in the trees, wearing red." He looked shaken. Elena blinked. "Like the girl who went missing last year?" Julian hesitated. "Maybe." "I couldn't get close. She disappeared." He sat across from her, eyes darting toward the old man. "They're watching us," he whispered. "Listening. No one here talks." "Exactly," he said. "Too quiet." Later that night, Elena wandered the muddy main street alone. Julian had gone to make a few calls, but his phone had no signal. None of theirs did. She passed a hardware store with boarded windows, a church with no cross, and then the storm siren. It was old, bolted to a rusted tower, but the sound it made pierced the silence like a scream. Elena shuddered. She imagined it wailing through the dark woods on the night the girl vanished. She kept walking until she reached the edge of the village, a crooked house, half swallowed by vines and time. The locals called it the old Marechal place. That's where it happened. The girl's body had been found just outside the door, torn apart, but never officially murdered. Just lost. Suddenly, a voice behind her. "You shouldn't be here." She spun. A man stood by the fence, middle-aged, thin, eyes wide with exhaustion. "Elena," she said, breathless. "You know who I am? Everyone knows. You're digging where you shouldn't." She stepped closer. "Who are you?" "Name's Jonah. I was the one who found her. The girl." His hands trembled as he pointed to the tree. She was nailed there, arms out, eyes gone. Elena froze. There was something written in the mud. Jonah whispered. "Only I saw it. Then it washed away." "What did it say?" Jonah stared at her, lips quivering. It said, "The storm doesn't take. It trades." Trades. That was the word Jonah had whispered, his voice cracking with something close to madness. The storm doesn't take. It trades. Elena couldn't sleep that night. She sat on the stiff mattress in her small rented room above Nora's diner, the wind tapping against the windows like impatient fingers. Her notebook lay open beside her, pages covered in scattered questions. Why does no one remember the girl? Why was she displayed like a symbol? What was traded? And one more, scribbled in red ink. What does the storm want? A knock came at her door. She flinched. "Midnight." "Elena," came Julian's voice. "It's me." She opened the door to find him pale, rain-soaked again, though it hadn't rained for hours. "I found something," he said. He handed her a torn page, yellowed with age. It was from a journal. At the top, in elegant handwriting, "Stormtown, offerings and exchanges." Below that, "The storm hungers. It does not strike blindly. It waits until something is given or taken." She looked up, heart hammering. "Where did you get this?" "There's an old archives room under the chapel. I picked the lock." Julian gave a grim smile. "But the door closed behind me on its own," he added quietly. "I was locked in for hours. Then it opened by itself." The next morning, the townspeople were gathered in front of the chapel. A new message had appeared, written in mud on the side of the building. "You came to take answers. You'll stay to give them." No one spoke. Elena scanned the faces. Nora, Jonah, the silent old man, a teenage boy clinging to his mother. None of them looked surprised. Then she saw something that made her stomach turn. In the crowd stood a girl, drenched in water, wearing red. She looked right at Elena and smiled. Smiled as if she knew Elena, as if she'd been waiting. But the moment Elena blinked, the girl in red was gone. No splash of footsteps in the wet grass, no rustle of fabric. Just gone. "Elena!" Julian's voice behind her broke the silence. "Did you see that?" The girl. "Yes." They both stared at the empty space between the crowd and the chapel. "She was right there," Elena whispered. "Same girl from your vision." Julian didn't respond. His gaze was distant, as if watching something only he could see. Then, abruptly, he turned and walked away. Later, at the edge of the village, Elena returned to Jonah's cabin. He was sitting on the porch, carving a crooked stick into something shapeless. Smoke drifted from a rusted tin chimney. "You saw her," he said, not looking up. "Yes, and Julian, too." Jonah's eyes narrowed. "That boy don't belong here." Elena frowned. "He's not from the village." "No," Jonah said, "but he's been here before." She blinked. "What do you mean?" Jonah stood slowly, limping inside. After a few seconds, he returned with a warped photograph, black and white, faded, a group of children, muddy, unsmiling. In the corner stood a small boy with messy black hair. It was Julian. Elena's breath caught. This can't be him. Jonah pointed to the back, scrawled in pencil. Stormtown School, 1991, Class of the Lost. That night, Elena confronted Julian in the diner. You've been here before. He looked confused, then afraid. No, I don't remember this place. She slid the photo across the table. You were here, Julian. What else are you hiding? His hands trembled as he gripped the picture. I've been dreaming of this town since I was a kid, he whispered. But I thought they were just dreams. I didn't think it was real. Then why does the town remember you? Julian looked up at her, eyes wide and wet. Because I think I left something behind. And from outside, a sound began to rise. The storm siren. Only this time, no one had turned it on. On the hill above the village, the old school stood crooked, like it had slouched under the weight of forgotten years. Elena didn't wait for Julian. She took her flashlight and recorder and followed the cracked path that led to the dead trees. The wind pressed against her back, like hands guiding her forward. When she reached the gate, she paused. The sign had rotted away, but faint letters still clung to the wood. STRMTOWNELMENTARY. The O hung loosely on one nail, swinging in the wind like a ticking clock. Inside, the building smelled of wet wood and dust. Desks lay overturned. Mold clung to the walls like bruises. She found the main hallway. Lockers, rusted and open. Children's names scratched into the doors. Stickers long peeled away. At the end, a classroom door hung open. Room 3B. She stepped inside. The walls were covered in children's drawings. Crude crayon scrawls of houses, trees, rain clouds, and one figure repeated again and again. A tall woman in red. No face, just black where the eyes should be. She flipped through a forgotten class journal left on the teacher's desk. Attendance log. Class of the Lost. She counted the names. 14 children. Then turned the page. Withdrawn/transferred/missing. 13. Only one remained. Julian Rourke. Suddenly the door behind her slammed shut. Elena spun around, heart racing. Julian, she called out. But the hallway was empty. Then came a sound. Not thunder. Not wind. A voice. A child's voice whispering. He didn't leave. He was given. Given, not taken. The words echoed in Elena's mind like footsteps in an empty corridor. She stumbled out of room 3B, pulse pounding, flashlight trembling in her hand. The building had grown colder. Too cold for summer. As she turned the corner, she saw something drawn on the floor in wet chalk. 13 plus I equals open. Elena froze. 13 given. One returned? Was that what Julian was? A return? She fled the schoolhouse, the wind biting at her heels. At Jonah's cabin, smoke curled from the chimney. He opened the door before she knocked. I saw the classroom, she said breathlessly. The drawings, the logbook, the chalk message. Jonah nodded slowly, as if he'd been expecting her. You saw the number? Yes. 13 missing. One left. Julian. Jonah sat back in his worn chair, staring into the fire. They used to call it the balance, he muttered. Every time the storm came, something disappeared. A crop, a roof, sometimes a person. But that year, 1991, the storm stayed for 13 nights. Elena felt the cold creep into her spine. And the children? They vanished, one by one. But on the last night, they found a boy at the edge of the forest, mud-covered, silent, didn't remember a thing. Julian. Jonah nodded, but he wasn't supposed to come back, he said, back in her room. Elena found Julian sitting on the floor, staring at a torn yearbook photo. I remember now, he whispered. Elena knelt beside him. There was a door in the woods. It only opened during the storm. The other kids went in. His voice cracked. They told me to stay behind, to wait, that I was the key. He looked up at her, eyes wild. I think the door is about to open again. Outside, the wind howled, and in the sky above Stormtown, the clouds were circling like a drain. Behavior in Stormtown had started to shift. People no longer made eye contact. Shops closed before dusk. Children were kept inside even when the sun was shining. And when the storm clouds gathered, the town simply held its breath. Elena watched from her motel window as Mrs. Carrick, the baker who always smiled, boarded up her windows in silence, her eyes wide and distant. Across the street, two elderly men stood on the porch of the post office, whispering and pointing toward the woods. Julian sat on the edge of the bed, knees pulled to his chest. "They remember," he said. "Maybe not clearly, but they feel what's coming." Elena nodded. "Then we don't have much time." That night, guided by Julian's fragmented memories, they made their way into forest behind the abandoned school. The trees stood unnaturally still. No wind, no insects, just the wet hush of anticipation. Julian stopped. "There," he said, pointing to a large moss-covered stone circle. In the center, a door. No frame, no hinges, just a freestanding slab of dark wood with a tarnished iron handle. Elena stepped closer. The air grew heavier. Sound itself seemed to fade. "Is it real?" she whispered. Julian's voice trembled. "It's not for everyone." Suddenly, the wind returned. Violent, screaming. The trees swayed like they were trying to run. A low hum filled the air, rising to a bone-shaking frequency. Then a voice, not from around them, from inside their heads. "One always remains. One always returns." Elena fell to her knees, clutching her ears. Julian stepped forward, eyes wide, tears running down his face. "I remember," he whispered. He reached for the handle. "Elena," he said softly, "if I open this door, don't follow me." Then he pulled it open, and what lay beyond wasn't darkness. It was light, blinding, screaming, alive. Julian stepped through and vanished. The door swung shut and vanished too. Elena stood alone in the forest clearing. Above, the wind stopped. The storm was gone, and the silence that followed was worse than the noise. Alone in the woods, Elena listened, but the silence screamed louder than thunder. The stone circle where the door had stood was now just dirt and moss, as if the earth had swallowed every trace of what had happened. Even Julian. She stumbled backward, flashlight flickering, breath catching in her throat. Had he really been taken? Had he returned? By dawn, the town was transformed. No clouds, no wind, a calm so unnatural it set her nerves on fire. People walked the streets again, but they smiled too much, moved too slowly. Their behavior wasn't just quiet, it was off. The man who ran the general store greeted her by name, though she'd never told it to him. "Storm's past," he said. "You can rest now." Elena froze. "I never told you about the storm." He just kept smiling, unmoving, until she backed away and left. She found Jonah on his porch, carving something into a piece of driftwood with shaking hands. "It's not over," Elena said. "Julian's gone." The door disappeared. "But something's wrong with everyone." Jonah nodded, slow and tired. "That's the cycle. One leaves, the others change." "What do you mean?" He looked up, eyes hollow. "The town isn't healed when the storm ends. It's reshaped, balanced." She stared at him. "So what now?" Jonah hesitated. "You'll start dreaming soon. That's how it begins. The whispers, the red door, the bargain." He dropped the wood carving. It was a perfect replica of the door. That night, Elena dreamed. She stood in a hallway filled with mirrors. Each one showed a version of herself. Older, younger, bleeding, laughing, screaming. At the end of the hall, a door. The same door. But this time, it had her name carved into it. She woke up with muddy footprints on her carpet, and they weren't hers. Hers, and yet not hers. The footprints led from the window to the door of her motel room, bare, human, child-sized. But she hadn't left the room. She would have heard it, would have felt it, unless she had left, unless something else had worn her shape in the dark. Elena stood motionless for minutes, heart rattling in her chest. When she finally gathered the courage to open the door, the hallway outside was silent, empty, except for a single object on the doormat, a small red marble, smooth, warm to the touch, and faintly pulsing like a living thing. She pocketed it, unsure why, and descended into town. At the diner, the usual patrons sat in eerie silence, forks scraping plates in unison. No music played, no orders taken. Only one table moved. A young girl with pale skin and tangled black hair, sitting alone, sipping chocolate milk through a crooked straw. Elena approached. "You're not from here," the girl said before she even sat down. "Neither are you," Elena replied. The girl smiled but didn't blink. "I wasn't. Now I'm between." "What's your name?" She paused. "Sadie." "Sometimes." Elena stared. "Sadie, are you real?" The girl reached into her coat and pulled out a second marble, identical to Elena's. "They leave these behind when they take too much," Sadie whispered. "Who?" The girl's voice dropped to a rasp. "The ones behind the door." Later that night, Elena sat with Jonah by the fire, the marble turning slowly in her hand. "She knew things," Elena said. "She said they're taking too much." Jonah didn't answer right away. Then he pointed to a painting on the wall, an old, dusty portrait of Stormtown's founding. "There used to be more people," he muttered. "Whole families. Generations. But the census always shows 300. Always." Elena froze. "They're balancing the number." In her dream that night, Elena didn't see the hallway of mirrors. She saw a field of red marbles. Endless. And each one whispered her name. Name. A simple word. A claim of identity. A doorway. Elena woke gasping. The red marble clutched so tightly in her fist it had left a blood mark on her palm. She could still hear the echoes from the dream, all those whispering voices, all calling her name. Not with malice, but with recognition. Like she had always been one of them. The next morning, she found Sadie again, this time outside the abandoned train station, drawing circles in the dirt with a stick. "You came back," the girl said. "You never left," Elena replied. Sadie didn't answer. Instead, she pointed behind Elena. There, just beyond the fence line, lay another door, this one crumbling with age, barely hanging in its frame, freestanding between two trees that didn't belong. "They put them everywhere," Sadie whispered, "but only some people see them. And if you go through," Elena asked, "you don't always come back the same." As dusk fell, Elena returned to Jonah, demanding answers. This time, he didn't dodge her. "I had a brother once," he said, 12 years old. He was sleepwalking during a storm. Disappeared without a trace. "They ever find him?" she asked. Jonah looked at her, eyes wet and distant. "He came back 2 days later. But it wasn't him." "What do you mean?" He didn't talk, didn't blink, just stared at the ceiling for weeks. Then one morning, he walked into the lake and didn't float. Silence. They said it was grief, but I saw the door in his eyes. That night, Elena visited the old church. Inside, a mural had been painted over, but the storm had peeled back layers of plaster, revealing parts of it. At the top, a sky torn open. Below, a crowd of faceless figures holding red marbles like offerings. In the center, a woman in red, mouth open wide, arms spread like wings. And under it, a phrase in Latin, Nomen est Janua. The name is the doorway. As thunder rolled in again, Elena looked down at her recorder. The last entry she'd made was hours ago, yet the device was playing, and her own voice whispered, "You are the next door." Door, not wood, not iron, not even a thing. It was an idea, an opening, a decision, and Elena had just become one. She didn't sleep that night. The whisper of her own voice on the recorder echoed in her ears until dawn. At exactly 3:33 a.m., her motel room light flickered. Once, twice, then off. A second later, the door creaked open, but there was no wind, no storm, just Sadie standing in the hallway, barefoot, soaked, and shaking. "They're almost through," the girl whispered. Elena sat up. Who? Sadie didn't answer. She opened her hand. Inside, where there should have been another red marble, was a tooth. Human, smooth, still bleeding. Jonah didn't believe her at first. A tooth? From a child. She's not just a child, Elena insisted. She's a messenger. Maybe more. Jonah ran a hand through his graying hair, sighing. You realize how insane this sounds. Elena stared at him. You told me your brother came back wrong. You told me the doors are real. I said the idea of them is real, not the rest. Then come with me, she said. And to his own surprise, he nodded. They returned to the abandoned train station together. The strange freestanding door between the trees was still there, old, rotting, but undeniably real. Carved into the top wood, almost invisible unless you squinted, was a name. E. Marlowe. Elena's breath caught in her throat. Jonah reached forward, brushing moss away from the lower part of the doorframe. Another carving. When the eye opens, the rest must close. What does that mean? She asked, voice barely audible. Jonah didn't respond. Because Sadie was no longer beside them. She was inside the door, smiling, and the red marble in Elena's pocket had begun to burn. IT wasn't fire. It was pull. The red marble in Elena's pocket pulsed like a heartbeat. Each throb synchronized with the faint shimmer in the door's wood grain. She reached for it, and it seared her fingers. Not enough to scar, just enough to mark. Behind her, Jonah whispered, Elena, don't. But it was already too late. The door opened without a sound, and the world flipped inside out. She didn't fall. She didn't walk. She drifted through an airless gray corridor where time pulsed like a dying light bulb. Paintings on invisible walls showed her memories, except they were wrong. Twisted, her mother's smile sharpened into teeth. Her apartment with too many windows. Herself, standing in the corner, watching. And then the train station. Again, but not abandoned. Alive. Lit. Operating. A schedule board blinked in and out of existence. Train 113, arrival. Nowhere. Passenger, E. Marlowe. Status, already boarded. She stumbled through a fog doorway and landed in a pew. A church, but not the church. This one was too tall, too wide, and full of statues that moved when you weren't looking. At the pulpit stood a figure in red robes, not speaking, not breathing, just staring. Elena turned to flee, and came face to face with herself. A perfect mirror, except this version's eyes were pure white, glowing faintly. What are you? Elena asked. The double didn't speak. It just held out a hand, offering the tooth Sadie gave her. But this one was blackened. Meanwhile, back in the real Stormtown, Jonah stood outside the now-closed door, frozen. Sadie, he whispered. But she was gone. Instead, a new figure emerged from the trees. Detective Julian Rourke. But something was off. His coat was dry despite the mist, and in his hand, a black marble. You shouldn't have let her through, Julian said. Jonah backed away. She had to know the truth. Julian smiled. Truth isn't what waits behind that door. He leaned close. It's memory. Memory wasn't always truthful. It adapted. It protected. And sometimes it lied. Elena reached for the blackened tooth in her reflection's hand. The instant her fingers touched it, the church dissolved around her. No more statues. No more pews. Just a house. Small, white, familiar. It took her 3 seconds to recognize it. Her childhood home. But she'd never been here. Not in Stormtown. Not anywhere close. She backed away. But the door opened by itself. Inside, a single lamp flickered. The walls were lined with photos. But all the faces were scratched out. Except one. Hers. A younger Elena. 8 years old. Standing beside someone. The figure beside her had no face. Just a blur. And a hand on her shoulder. The photo was dated. October 17th, 1996. Stormtown. Her knees buckled. I've never been here before, she whispered. I wasn't born until 97. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps upstairs. Then whispers. Soft. Echoed. Backward. Roram ate morphamak tnac woy. Wonk woy ta tunis I terti. Rots wyam ever yet. A door creaked open above her. The hallway stretched impossibly long. The wallpaper peeled like skin, exposing writing beneath. She stepped forward. At the end of the hall stood Sadie. Only this time, Sadie's eyes weren't red. They were her mother's. "Elena," the girl said, "you left us in the dark." Meanwhile, Jonah and Julian stared at the pulsing door. "You said truth isn't behind it," Jonah said. "Then what is?" Julian looked pale now, almost sick. "Stormtown, it doesn't just attract storms. It remembers." He glanced over his shoulder. "And when someone brings back a key, like your friend did, it starts waking up." "A key?" Julian held up the black marble. "Each victim leaves a piece behind. A memory, a fragment. The killer doesn't just take lives. He takes history." Jonah shivered. "Then what's the killer trying to build?" Julian didn't answer, because at that moment, the door opened again. But it wasn't Elena who stepped out. It was her, the other her, smiling, holding a red umbrella. Umbrella, red, perfect, wrong. Jonah stared at her, at Elena, or whoever wore her face. The red umbrella was dry, too dry, like it hadn't touched the storm at all. Her smile was too calm, her voice too steady. "Jonah," she said, stepping forward, "I found what we needed." He flinched, something in her tone, too crisp, too rehearsed. Behind her, the doorway began to rot, would peel back. The light from inside flickered violently, showing glimpses of a different Elena, curled in a corner, screaming with her eyes wide open. "Who are you?" Jonah asked. She blinked, slow. "Elena," she said again. "Don't you recognize me?" Inside the collapsing space behind the door, Elena was still in the house, still trapped in a false memory. Sadie stood motionless at the top of the stairs. Her voice echoed, layered and distorted. "You need to wake up," the girl said. "He's using your face." Elena's breath quickened. "Who is he?" Sadie didn't answer with words. Instead, she pointed to a mirror on the wall. Inside the mirror, the house looked normal, clean, sunny. But at the center of the reflection stood a man, tall, faceless, wearing a long coat stitched from skin. He held a camera, and he was filming. Not the room, not Sadie, just Elena, back outside. Julian stepped between Jonah and the Elena with the umbrella. He raised his hand. "If you're her," he said, "then tell me where you first met me." She hesitated, a moment too long. "In your office. You offered me coffee." Jonah gasped. "No, it was a motel. You showed up while we were unpacking." Julian's jaw tensed. "She doesn't know," he said softly. Then to the woman, "You're not her." Her smile didn't fade. It widened. "You're too late," she said. Behind them, the mist began to churn, like something enormous was moving beneath it, like a sea creature beneath ice. "They opened the gate last time," she whispered, "and you never closed it." She stepped back into the fog and disappeared. Elena screamed. The house cracked. Flames burst from the floorboards, not hot but cold, freezing everything they touched. Sadie grabbed Elena's hand and pulled her toward the mirror. "Go now or stay forever." Elena leapt and landed in the real world, gasping. She coughed, shivering, soaked in a cold sweat. Julian and Jonah were beside her, visibly relieved. "Elena?" Jonah asked. She looked up and whispered, "That thing wore me like a coat." Coat, not hers, not human. Elena stared at the sleeves. What she'd seen, what she'd felt, wasn't just mimicry. The thing had worn her memories like a costume. Her life had become a disguise. Julian crouched beside her. "Elena," he said gently, "you weren't just watching something in there. You were part of it." She nodded slowly. "I didn't remember any of it, but the house, the photos, that voice." Jonah knelt, holding the red umbrella left behind. "It didn't vanish," he said. "It just left a trail." He flipped the umbrella inside out. Sewn into fabric were faint, barely visible coordinates. They followed them, out of the town center. away from the church ruins, toward the hills behind the cemetery, where the wind was always wrong and no bird sang. The coordinates led them to an old storm shelter, sunken into the ground, rusted shut, padlocked from the outside. It looked untouched for decades, except a fresh white coat hung from a nail on the door, the same kind Sadie wore. Jonah touched it. It was warm. Elena, he said, didn't Sadie die in a fire? Elena shook her head. That's just the story people tell. The truth is, no one ever found her body. They broke the lock. Inside, the shelter smelled like ash and wet wood. And something else, developing chemicals. A red light buzzed dimly. In the back corner, an old darkroom. Dozens of photographs lined the walls. They showed people, but not just people. Each image had two exposures. A human face, overlaid with a shadow, peeking from behind it. Sometimes it was eyes, sometimes hands, sometimes mouths where mouths shouldn't be. Elena, Jonah whispered, they're all from this town. One photo in the center showed Sadie, but her eyes were pitch black. She held something. A sign. I opened the door. Suddenly, the generator cut out. Pitch black. The red light flickered back once, just once, and in that instant they saw it. Something in the room with them. Behind Julian. Tall, silent, wearing her face. Face, but not his. Julian froze. His breath caught in his throat as the dim red bulb blinked once more. In that flicker, he saw it again, his own reflection in the broken mirror, smiling. But he wasn't smiling. Elena, he whispered, not turning his head. It's wearing me now. She grabbed his arm instinctively. What? Then the mirror cracked. A long, jagged line split it straight to the middle of Julian's reflection, dividing it into two versions of him. One scared, one grinning. Jonah backed toward the door. We need to get out. Now! But the latch was gone. The storm shelter had no door anymore. The walls began to change. Not visibly, but audibly. They were whispering. Dozens of overlapping voices, like old recordings warped by time. She opened the door. He saw the camera. I wore her name. Stormtown was built on its mouth. Elena stumbled back into the darkroom. A box undeveloped film had tipped over. One reel was still warm. She reached for it, and it burned her fingers. Not from heat, from something alive. Julian grunted. He was fighting something. Inside, his face twitched violently, then relaxed into a crooked smile. Elena, he said in a soft, lilting tone. It's so much quieter when you give in. She backed away. You're not Julian. He chuckled. No, but he's watching, right behind his eyes. So polite. He stepped forward. Jonah screamed and hurled a chemical jar, which shattered just beside Julian's head. The possessed man didn't flinch. Stormtown, the thing said, turning toward the black and white photos, isn't cursed. It's hungry. Suddenly, from above, a knock, then another, muffled, from outside the shelter. They froze. The thing paused too. 3 more knocks. Then a voice. Julian, Elena, Jonah, it's Detective Marin. Can you hear me? The thing hissed and melted back into Julian's body. His eyes went blank, then filled with tears. I'm back, he gasped. Oh, God. I was somewhere else. Watching. Jonah ran to the wall and pounded on it. We're here. We're down here. Silence. Then a final reply. I'm not Marin. And the knocking resumed from beneath them. Beneath their feet, the knocking had become a rhythm. It wasn't a signal. It was a summoning. The floor of the storm shelter began to pulse, like a heartbeat in the dirt. The walls sweated. The air grew thick and sour, and all light seemed to bend slightly, like reality was warping under pressure. Jonah backed away. This place is alive. It's not just hiding something. It's feeding. Elena crouched by Julian, who was trembling, pupils wide. Are you still with us? He nodded slowly, voice raw. It's getting stronger every time we look at it. Think about it. Speak its name. Jonah's voice broke. We don't even know its name. Julian looked at him with something between dread and certainty. We do now. It's Stormtown. Elena shivered. The word wasn't just a name. It was a door. Every time they said it, something listened. She gripped the reel of undeveloped film tightly, ignoring the searing pain it caused. The image inside wasn't just a photo. It was a recording of something that should never have been captured. Do you have your lighter? She asked Julian. He nodded, pulled it from his coat. We burn it, she said, before it gets out. But as the flame touched the film, a voice screamed, not from their mouths, but from inside their skulls. Door remembered. Path opened. The ground cracked. And then they weren't in the shelter anymore. They stood in a fog corridor. Stone walls. Flickering yellow lights above. Swaying as though underwater. The air buzzed like a cassette tape slowly unraveling. A hallway stretched in both directions. On each side, mirror doors, hundreds of them, each reflecting versions of themselves that weren't quite right. Julian's reflection looked older. Jonah's had no mouth. Elena's wasn't her at all. It was Sadie, smiling gently. And behind Sadie's reflection, a small black hole began to form. Jonah stepped away from the mirrors. We're not in the shelter. Julian nodded slowly. We're in the film. Elena's heart pounded. It didn't record the monster. It recorded the space it came through. Suddenly, from down the endless hallway, footsteps, not echoing, absorbing. Someone or something was approaching, but it wasn't casting a shadow, because it was a shadow. Julian whispered, "Don't look at it. Don't think. Don't speak." The lights overhead flickered violently. Jonah pointed. Too late. Elena turned toward the figure. It looked like her father, but her father had died 20 years ago. She had buried this memory. Her father's face was kind, calm, familiar, but the longer she stared, the more it unraveled. His skin blurred at the edges, flickering between flesh and static. And when he opened his mouth, it wasn't a voice that came out. It was a chorus, whispering, hissing, pleading. Let us in. Let us wear her. She remembered. She opened. She named. Julian yanked Elena back just as the figure stepped forward, arms outstretched. Don't speak to it, he said sharply. It's not him. It's never them. Jonah turned toward one of the mirrored doors, desperate. His reflection was still mouthless, but now smiling. I think we're not supposed to escape, he muttered. I think this is it. The maze. The trap. No, Elena said. It's a test. She turned toward Sadie's reflection again, still smiling, still waiting. She's been showing us the way all along. Elena stepped forward and touched the mirror with Sadie inside. It cracked, then shattered. Light burst from behind it, blinding white, and the shadow thing behind her screamed, not with pain but with rage. Elena grabbed Julian and Jonah, and they ran into the light. They collapsed in the middle of the Stormtown cemetery. It was raining, hard, but it was morning. The sky was gray, familiar, and quiet. No shadow, no whispers, just the sound of wind in the pines. Julian stood first. Are we back? Jonah checked his watch. It was still ticking. Elena looked toward the shelter entrance. It was gone, the hill untouched, as if it had never existed. Then she noticed a headstone beside them. It read, Sadie Marlowe, born 1990, died 1997. She opened the door so we wouldn't have to. Her breath caught. She touched her pocket. The red marble was gone. Julian pulled something from his coat, a single photograph, the one from the darkroom, Sadie holding the sign. Except now it said something new. She closed it. They never spoke of it again. Not really. Jonah left Stormtown 3 days later. Julian stayed, became sheriff. And Elena, she wrote no article. But sometimes, on cold nights when thunder rolled over the lake, she dreamed of doors. And one always bore her name. Name it and it knows you. That was the rule. Maybe the only one. Elena hadn't spoken Stormtown aloud since that day in the cemetery. But she thought it. Sometimes in the quiet. Sometimes in her dreams. And now, standing alone in her city apartment 10 years later, she felt again. The knock, 3 soft taps. Behind the mirror, Jonah had vanished 2 years ago. Julian, now almost unrecognizable, wrote her last winter. Just one line. It's not a place. It's a rhythm. And then silence. So Elena did what she always feared she would. She returned. Stormtown was dead. Not empty, dead. Like a dream left too long in the dark. No people. No voices. Just the wind. The cemetery was overgrown. The diner rusted shut. And in the town square, a mirror 7 feet tall, standing alone, framed in stone, and etched at the top words she had never seen. If you look long enough, you'll see yourself leave. She stepped forward, and inside the glass stood Sadie. But this time she wasn't child. She was Elena. The reflection blinked first, and whispered, "There never was a killer." Elena shook her head. "No, that's not true. The bodies were real." The reflection smiled faintly. "There were no bodies until you came. The town didn't rot. You opened it. You remembered me. That's when it started. I wasn't trapped behind the door, Elena. I was the door." Flashback. A storm. A girl lost in the woods. A red marble in her hand. A mistake. A whisper. "Name me." And she did. Back in the present. Elena stepped toward the mirror. The image flickered, her face, and not her face. Sadie, the creature, her father, the killer, all of them. Then she said it. "I remember." The glass shattered outward, not inward. Light, wind, storm. Then silence. Elena was gone, and where she once stood, a small stone, inscribed with only one word. Closed.